Hello, bearded bee people. Welcome back to Being KBs. Today I'm going to talk about the unfortunate topic of what to do if your bees die over winter. We're going to talk about the mindset you should take into this and how you can become a better beekeeper because of it. We're also going to talk about some specific things like diagnosing what caused your bees to die and what you can do going forward to ensure you have bees in the spring. So if your bees died and you're super bummed about it, but you're really determined to be a better beekeeper and have bees alive next spring, stay tuned. I hope this video will help. Now, the first thing that you would think that you would want to talk about in terms of what to do when your bees died would be about diagnosing and figuring out what to do going forward. But I'm going to talk first about the mindset, because in the first couple of years of beekeeping, it is a humbling thing. There's so much to learn, and you try so hard, you work so hard, you have so much emotionally and financially invested in these bees that it's super difficult to blame yourself and to realize that there was something that you could have done better to have your bees alive. It's just a tough pill to swallow, but it is one that needs to be swallowed. And mainly when I'm talking about this, I mean whether your bees died because of lack of food or more commonly because of a mite load or a virus load, these things need to be stared at. They need to be confronted. They need to be figured out and amended for us to be better beekeepers going forward. Just recently, I was a part of a conversation on a beekeeping group on Facebook. And this is a conversation that I've had many times with many people. The question was, why did my bees die? And the first comment was, what were your bees mite load going into winter? And of course, I just click like. That's the proper question to ask. The response that he gave was that he treated his bees in the fall and in the spring. So he didn't think that it was a thing that needed to be discussed. Mites weren't an issue. But he didn't know what the load was, and that was just it. That was where he was at. That was his mindset. Later on, when I read the rest of the forum, I realized that he was going out of his way at every corner to make sure that he could deflect the blame from himself. He was proposing the idea that a wild temperature swing happened in January that killed his bees. He was proposing the idea that it was just a super humid winter and it was condensation that killed his bees. He was talking about insulating his hive. And all of these conversations are moot. They're not worth having if you're not going to be sending healthy bees into the winter. Now, I understand that getting over the whole overwhelming aspect of mites and going out of your way to treat and then finding out that you didn't do enough, it's tough. That's difficult to swallow. That's a difficult thing to be able to confront, to say, something I did killed my bees. But unfortunately, that's usually the case. So please, when your bees die and you're wondering what you should have done or what you could have done or what you can do going forward, be prepared to face some mistakes that you made and realize that you can be a better beekeeper. You can do things better and you can have your bees survive. Okay, and now you're over the fact that it might have been your fault and you're willing and ready to analyze the situation and figure out exactly what it was that you did wrong or that went wrong for your bees. And in that, we have to diagnose the data. Now, the first thing that we do in terms of diagnosing it is walking up to the hive, just keeping an eye on what you see. Are there any large piles of bees out front? Are there any large piles of wax cappings up front? Or is the cover missing? Is the hive shifted in any way? Has anything externally happened to it? Is there an excessive amount of bee poop all over the outside of the hive? These are things to keep in mind before you open up the cover. Next, you're going to want to try to remove those boxes or box off of your bottom board without messing with the frames that are inside them. What you really want to do is be able to look at the bottom board the way it was when the cluster was above them. This will give you the ability to see if there is a preponderance of dead mites on the bottom board. This will give you the ability to see if there are a bunch of decapitated bees that might indicate a yellow jacket problem in the fall. This will give you the ability to see if there are any huge piles of wax cappings that would indicate a robbing issue, or any other thing that might be curious or that might be a clue that will lead you to the cause of your bees dying. Next, when you get into those boxes, you're going to want to start to pay attention to the food level. Not only the food level, how much it is, but where it's at inside the hive and where the bees are in relation to it. Sometimes there are situations where freezing cold temperatures, it will keep the bees away from the food and keep the bees away from being able to break cluster to access the food. So if there is a bunch of food, but a good, sizable, healthy cluster of bees is away from it, that's a possible cause. In most cases, though, to be honest, the bees have such a good ability to generate and maintain heat in the cluster that when there's food inside the hive and the bees died, my mind goes to mites. It is worth noting, though, that the food can be inaccessible based on where it's at and where the bees are at. So take note of that. If there's no food at all, it's likely that your bees starved, which is another really common beginner mistake, just not realizing how much food these bees need to make it through the long and cold winter. Now, it could also be a sign of robbing, which is once again why my advice is to keep an eye out for any large piles of wax cappings that would indicate a lot of honey being removed in a particular period of time. Now, if you see that stuff and there's no food, robbing was likely a cause, and it was probably something that happened in the fall. As you're removing these frames, you will want to be paying attention to how clean they are. Not so much because of mold, because mold will grow inside a hive, especially a dead hive with a bunch of dead, wet, moldy bees. So in terms of the cleanliness of these frames, I'm talking about bee poop. Poop-affected frames can indicate a diet issue. It's not really a sign of nosema anymore. A lot of people will bring up nosema when they see dysentery on or inside a hive. Nosema apis is the old version, and dysentery was a symptom of that, or is a symptom of Nosema apis. But Nosema ceranae has taken over in the United States, and dysentery is not a symptom of Nosema ceranae. So usually when we see poop like that, it's a diet issue, not a parasite or an infection problem. Either way, it is a good idea to get rid of those frames. They can be a bacterial issue going forward. And keep in mind the fact that these diet issues may have contributed to your bees struggling over the course of the winter. The last thing that I think is very important to check when you're going through your dead outs are the bees themselves. Now, there may not be a whole lot of them. If there aren't a lot of bees, that was likely a slow, gradual death that was likely caused by an infection or a varroa mite load. If there are a lot of dead bees inside the hive and in the frames, it was likely more sudden in that case, whether it was starving or cold or some group of things that all happened at a specific time. So another thing to check when you're going through your dead outs, and probably the most important thing to pay attention to, are the health of the bees. Now, there might not be a whole lot of bees depending on how suddenly the bees died, but if there are bees inside that hive, inside the cells or in between the frames, when you're pulling those frames out, check those wings. You'll want to make sure that you're checking for K-wing, which is when the two wing segments are separated from each other, but you also want to make sure that you're checking for deformed wings, where the two wing segments are shriveled and malformed. Either way, these are signs of viruses that will definitely make it more difficult for your bees to survive the winter. Deformed wing virus is vectored by the varroa mite. So if you see deformed wings, you can guarantee yourself that mites were the cause of those bees dying. K-wing can be a different cause, a different virus that's not vectored by varroa mites. But either way, lots of bees with badly affected wings, whether in K-wing or deformed wing, is a sign that a virus contributed to the death of your bees. The last thing to consider when diagnosing your dead out is whether they had a problem in the fall. And my mindset and my advice for anybody who listens to anything I have to say is to take your losses in the fall. If you have a problem, you had a colony that swarmed late, or you have a colony that just didn't build up throughout the entire year and is just on its last legs. Maybe it's a nuke that just never built up past the nuke size. These colonies need to be combined or spread out or culled totally, because those are going to be dead outs that you're cleaning out in the spring. Now, if they had any issue like that, you have to take that into consideration when trying to decide what killed your bees. If they were a small cluster size, they were probably likely to die. If they had some disease problem in the fall, it's very difficult for those bees to survive along the long and arduous winter with a high virus load or a bacterial infection or any type of disease that you may have noticed. So if that was the case, definitely take that into account when you're trying to figure out what it was. And if it was something that was gross or contagious, you really, really should be reluctant to use those frames and that equipment with your new bees, especially if you had any inclination that it was American foul brood that you had in the fall, which is a situation where you have to just burn all of the equipment. So in the sign of any type of disease, take that into account during your autopsy. The next thing, after you're done with your autopsy, you've diagnosed it, maybe it was just too little food or you just didn't do enough for the mites. My advice is order new bees. Don't put it off for a year. Don't fret over the loss, because these are mistakes that sort of have to be made. These are lessons that have to be learned, and you have to jump right back into the pool. You've got to learn from these mistakes right now while they're fresh. You have to care for these new bees. This pain from your old bee's demise is still there. This gives you a great incentive to be a better beekeeper. It gives you a great desire to find out how to be a better beekeeper and how to keep your bees alive. And so, like I said, I think that it's very important that as soon as you find out that all your bees are dead, you get on the phone or get on the internet and order some new bees so that you have some that will arrive, that you can install in that old equipment and use these lessons that you learned. When you're ordering bees, get more than one. Get 3. 3 is my recommendation for somebody who's a beginner, especially a beginner who just lost all their bees through their first winter. The reason for that is so that you can compare against each other and so that you can have resources to give to aid issues as they happen throughout the year. But also, more bees is a higher chance that you are going to have some success, and you can learn from success the same way you can learn from mistakes. So get on that phone, get on those websites, order those bees, get them locally if you can from somebody who knows what they're doing. That'll be a great asset in this next year. Now that you've diagnosed your dead out and you've ordered new bees, you've got to clean your equipment and prepare it for these bees that are going to arrive. I've said this a bunch of times in the past on this channel. The vast majority of equipment that you see in your dead out, no matter how gross it is, can be used with your new bees. The only things that I definitely don't give to new bees are severely gross poop-affected frames or obviously disease-affected frames. Frames with dead bees in the cells or blue mold all over them, those are fine. I don't have any problem giving those to new bees because they'll clean it up quickly and efficiently and never complain, not even a single time. What you should do is scrape off all of the grossness off of the bottom board, shake off any of the dead bees that will just easily shake off, find those really gross frames that may or may not exist in the hive that you do have to get rid of, and store the stuff for the next few weeks while you're waiting for your new bees to arrive. Keep the honey frames for your new bees. It was likely that you were feeding in the fall, and some of those honey frames have some of that syrup in there, so it's probably not honey that you want to extract and eat or sell, and those frames would be a great asset to a new package or even a nuke. If you don't want to feed any of this stuff to your new bees for one reason or another, if you bought nukes and don't really have any room for any more honey frames, you can absolutely just leave those frames out in an open box and let your bees rob that stuff out. But it's my advice that you save them and give them to your splits or give them to your new packages, because those frames are super, super useful in those cases. In order to store the drawn frames from your dead outs and have them ready for those new bees before they arrive, you really don't have to take too much effort in this. The big thing we're trying to avoid when we're storing drawn comb are wax moth infestations. Wax moths will fly in and lay eggs, and those larvae will burrow in through the combs, leaving a silk trail that just completely ruins the comb. Now, early in the spring, between early March, and when packages and nukes arrive, isn't really the time that wax moths are out causing issues. Now, if you're afraid of wax moths, maybe you're in a different region, or you're having to store your frames for a longer period of time than these couple of weeks that I'm referring to, then you might have to take a more permanent solution. My best method in that is an airtight container. If you can get them in a heavy-duty plastic trash bag, all duct taped perfectly closed, that'll be awesome. That'll be perfect. Nothing will be able to get in or out, and your frames will be fine and ready for use when you need them. If you can't, maybe you have too many boxes, maybe you're afraid of those little plastic bags getting tears in them and having something get in, then sunlight is another good option. If you have an open shed or barn and you've got an area where you can have your boxes staggered so that sunlight can get in all of the nooks and crannies of those boxes, that will be enough of a deterrent to keep wax moths out. If you can't do the airtight container or the sunlight situation, and that is the situation that we are at currently, we just have too many boxes to store and too little space to put bags or keep them all in open sunlight, we use para mothballs. And this is really important that you find the para mothballs, not the regular mothballs that your grandma used in her closet. These have to be the para crystals. The active ingredient is para-dichlorobenzene, as opposed to naphthalene, which is the active ingredient in the old kind. The difference here is that the para-dichlorobenzene does not contaminate the wax, whereas the naphthalene does. So if you are going to use this chemical method of keeping wax moths out of your drawn stuff, use the para mothballs, take a few of them, put them in a plastic bag, and cut a couple holes in the plastic bag. They'll slowly release their vapor over the course of however long it is that you have to store them, and they're pretty effective at keeping the wax moths out. So to summarize, this is a difficult subject. We've got to be humble. We've got to accept the fact that we made mistakes in order to be able to be a better beekeeper going forward. If you don't know what your mite load was, I promise you they played a part in your colony's death. There's so many inclement, crappy situations that healthy bees can survive through, that once you really start staying on top of your mite load and keeping truly healthy bees, you'll start to notice this. That's why I always say healthy bees survive. That's why I roll my eyes when people go out of their way to create these awesome, crazy, involved quilt boxes and stuff for moisture control. Not that it's not a good thing to try to control moisture in your hive, but my point is it's a much better thing to try to keep healthy bees. If you're going to do one or the other, make sure that you have healthy bees. They will surprise you at what kind of crappy conditions they will survive through. But yeah, just be humble. Try to accept the fact that you made a mistake. Know that I've made so freaking many. That's why I have so many lessons to share here on this channel. So if you have any questions, maybe something wasn't clear, you need something clarified, leave that in the comment section below, and I'd be happy to chat with you there. Otherwise, thank you very much for being here and watching this video. If you want to see these videos as they come out going forward, click subscribe or that notification bell. Either way, once again, thank you very much for being here. Get out and have some fun with your bees. See ya.